Smyger. Smyger operates out of Guangzhou, one of the manufacturing capitals of southern China, building guitars and ukuleles both under its own name and for other companies that put their own logos on the headstock. That double life, part brand, part factory, is the standard structure of the Chinese guitar industry, and Smyger is a textbook example of how it works. The company sells across Asia at prices that make Western entry-level guitars look expensive, and its instruments show up in classrooms, music schools, and first guitar stories across the region. Nobody buys a Smyger to impress anyone, and that's the point. Brands like this one quietly handled the largest job in the guitar world, getting an instrument into the hands of someone holding one for the first time. IRC. IRC is one of the more unusual operations in China, because alongside ordinary acoustics, it builds things most factories won't touch: metal-bodied resonators, carbon fiber guitars, and old-fashioned parlor designs, sold under its own name and as an OEM builder for brands around the world. Its shiny brass and steel resonators, engraved with dragons and lotus flowers, have become a quiet cult item among slide players who can't justify vintage American prices. The company represents a stage of Chinese manufacturing that catches many players off guard, not the cheapest option, but the flexible one, willing to build small runs of strange instruments that bigger factories consider not worth the setup time. Plenty of boutique-looking resonators in Western homes started life on an IRC workbench. Merida. Merida is a Chinese acoustic brand that decided to compete on specification rather than price alone, loading its mid-range guitars with solid tops, comfortable armrest bevels, and finish work that photographs like instruments costing twice as much. The brand's Extrema series became its calling card, aimed at players stepping up from a first guitar who assumed that step required a Western name. Merida sells heavily across Asia and has been creeping into Western awareness through dealers and reviewers who keep reaching the same conclusion. The spec sheet doesn't lie. The brand is part of a generation of Chinese companies that stopped asking how cheap a guitar could be and started asking how much guitar could be built for the money, which is a very different question. Shiji. Shiji is what happens when Chinese guitar building goes boutique. Founded by a luthier who put his own name on the headstock, the brand builds electrics in small numbers with the kind of detail work, rolled fingerboard edges, immaculate fretwork, carefully wound pickups that reviewers usually associate with American custom shops. Shiji guitars started reaching Western players through YouTube demos and importers, and the reaction followed a now familiar arc: suspicion, then surprise, then a waiting list. The instruments cost real money by Chinese standards while still undercutting the American builders they're measured against. Shiji matters because it breaks the last stereotype standing, the idea that China can build cheap guitars and good guitars, but not guitars with a soul and a builder's name behind them. ERT sells the kind of spec sheet that shouldn't exist at its prices. Headless designs, stainless steel frets, roasted maple necks, and coil-splitting electronics on guitars that cost less than some effects pedals. The brand sells directly through online marketplaces, skipping distributors entirely, and became a fixture of guitar YouTube's favorite genre, the "I can't believe this is this cheap" review. ERT's headless models in particular gave players a way to try a modern design trend for a fraction of what boutique headless builders charge. The guitars aren't flawless, and nobody claims they are. What they are is proof of how fast the floor is rising. Features that were premium 5 years ago are now shipping standard on instruments priced like toys. Grody built its reputation on semi-hollow guitars that look from stage distance like instruments costing 10 times more. Sold almost entirely through Amazon and other marketplaces, Grody's 335 style and single-cut models became a recurring shock in review videos, with players expecting a joke and finding a gig-ready instrument after a basic setup. The brand represents the purest version of the Chinese direct-to-consumer model. No dealers, no marketing budget, no story, just an absurd amount of guitar per dollar shipped to your door in a cardboard box. Grody guitars have become a common recommendation for players who want a second style of instrument, a hollow body to complement a solid body, without committing serious money to find out if they'll use it. Glary. Glary is the bottom of the market, and it owns that position without shame. Its guitars and basses sell for the price of a restaurant dinner, made possible by ruthless simplification, basic hardware, thin finishes, and packaging engineered down to the cent. Guitar YouTube turned Glary into a running experiment, with reviewers buying them, expecting comedy, and usually finding an instrument that, after a setup, genuinely functions. For a lot of families, a Glary is the difference between a kid trying guitar and not trying it. The brand will never be respected the way builders are respected, but it occupies a position with real consequences. The cheapest working instrument in history, available to almost anyone, delivered in 2 days. J&D. J&D has been building budget guitars in China for decades, long before the current wave of direct-to-consumer brands existed, selling heavily across Asia, Australia, and Europe. The brand occupies the traditional entry-level slot, starter packs, student instruments, affordable copies of classic designs, and has outlasted wave after wave of competitors in a segment where companies usually appear and vanish within a few years. That longevity is the story. While flashier brands chase viral moments, J&D quietly keeps shipping enormous volumes of first guitars through ordinary music shops, the kind of unglamorous distribution that doesn't make YouTube videos but builds an industry. Ask guitar teachers across Asia what their students actually show up with, and this name comes up constantly. Firefly. Firefly became a phenomenon almost by accident. Around 2020, its FF338 semi-hollow, a 335 style guitar, selling for a fraction of the usual price, started getting reviews that used the word unbelievable without irony, and the guitars began selling out within hours of every restock. Owning one became a small badge of insider knowledge, proof you were paying attention to what guitar forums had figured out before the wider market. The Firefly effect rattled assumptions across the industry because it wasn't a famous brand discounting a product. It was an unknown name delivering quality that made the price gap between Chinese and Western factories impossible to ignore. Plenty of players who started with a skeptical Firefly purchase ended up asking harder questions about what the extra $1,000 elsewhere actually buys. Taima. Taima is one of the fastest rising acoustic names in China, building guitars that target the exact segment Western brands considered their safest territory, the serious beginner and intermediate player spending real money for the first time. Taima acoustics ship with solid tops, tasteful appointments, and setup quality that earns repeated praise from dealers, and the brand has expanded aggressively through Asian markets while beginning to reach Western ones. The company's approach mirrors what Japanese brands did in the 1970s and Korean brands did in the 1990s, absorb the lessons of OEM manufacturing, then launch a house brand that keeps the quality and drops the middleman. History suggests exactly where that path leads, which is precisely what should worry the established names. Farida. Farida runs one of the most respected guitar factories in China, and for years its main business was building instruments for Western brands whose customers had no idea where their guitars actually came from. That OEM work gave Farida something rare, production discipline developed under the quality control demands of famous clients. The company's own brand grew out of that foundation, and in the United Kingdom especially, Farida built a genuine artist roster, putting its name on guitars played by touring musicians rather than just catalog models. Farida is the clearest example of the open secret at the heart of the modern guitar industry. The factories were never the weak point. The logos were just deciding how much credit the factories were allowed to take. Poputar. Poputar, built by the company Popumusic, is a guitar with LED lights embedded in the fretboard, connected to an app that turns learning songs into something closer to a video game. Lights show you where your fingers go. The app listens to whether you hit the note, and a generation raised on gamified apps suddenly has a guitar that speaks their language. The concept launched through crowdfunding and found an audience the traditional industry has always struggled to reach: absolute beginners who quit within the first month. Whatever traditionalists think of light-up fretboards, the abandonment rate of new guitarists is the industry's oldest unsolved problem, and Poputar is one of the few genuinely new attacks on it. The idea came from the Chinese tech industry, not the Western guitar industry, and that fact is its own story. Mooer. Mooer started in Shenzhen as an effects pedal company, shrinking famous circuits into tiny, affordable enclosures, and became one of the biggest names in budget effects worldwide. Then it did something guitar companies weren't expecting. It put the pedals inside the guitar. Mooer's GTRS line builds wireless connectivity, onboard effects, amp modeling, and app control directly into otherwise normal-looking instruments, letting a player practice with a full rig using nothing but the guitar and headphones. It's the logic of the smartphone applied to the electric guitar, hardware, and software sold as one object. Western companies have flirted with guitar technology for decades and mostly retreated. A Shenzhen electronics company simply treated the guitar as another device and shipped it. Chibson. Chibson isn't a company. It's the nickname for the flood of counterfeit guitars, fake Gibsons, fake Fenders, complete with forged logos that pour out of unauthorized Chinese workshops onto marketplace sites. The name became guitar culture's running joke, but the phenomenon is serious enough that major brands run permanent legal operations against it, and custom seizures of fake instruments number in the thousands. The counterfeits matter to this story for an uncomfortable reason. Some of them are good enough to fool buyers until an expert looks closely, which says something the industry hates acknowledging about how replicable its premium products have become. The fakes are illegal, unsupported, and a gamble to buy, but their existence is the shadow, cast by everything else in this video. Manufacturing skill that grew faster than the old brand hierarchy could contain. Kepma. Kepma is the best-selling acoustic guitar brand in China, which given the size of the Chinese market makes it one of the largest acoustic guitar operations on the planet, producing instruments at a scale most Western companies can barely picture. The brand dominates its home market with affordable, consistent acoustics, then pushed into smart guitars with built-in learning systems, screens, and sensors aimed at the same beginner retention problem the whole industry chases. Most Western players have never held one, which is exactly what makes Ketma worth knowing about. The biggest players in the next era of the guitar market may not be the names on vintage posters. A company can now become one of the world's largest guitar makers before the Western market learns to pronounce it. Donner. Donner is the brand that conquered Amazon. Starting with tiny, affordable effects pedals, the Shenzhen company expanded into guitars, basses, keyboards, drums, and accessories, becoming the default search result for a generation of beginners buying their first gear online. Donner's Hush-Eye, a collapsible headless silent guitar built for travel and headphone practice, became a genuine viral product, showing up in apartments, tour buses, and hotel rooms worldwide. The company operates like a consumer electronics brand. Fast product cycles, direct sales, relentless price points applied to musical instruments. Traditional brands built their empires through music stores over decades. Donner built its version through search rankings and shipping speed in a few years, and the difference in velocity is the entire story of modern retail. Enya. Enya went from making ukuleles to making some of the most technologically ambitious guitars on the market. The company's carbon fiber instruments shrugged off the humidity problems that torment wooden guitars. And then its next G series pushed further, building a speaker, effects, looper, and wireless system into the instrument itself, producing something between a guitar and a portable performance rig. Enya's designs look like consumer tech products because they're conceived that way, aimed at players who want to make music immediately rather than assemble a system of gear. The brand's carbon fiber models made it a fixture of the travel guitar conversation worldwide. A company from Guangdong effectively asked what a guitar would look like if it were invented today, and then manufactured the answer. Lava. Lava Music is the most visible face of the new Chinese guitar industry, and its flagship needs no explanation to go viral. A one-piece carbon fiber body with a touchscreen built into it, carrying effects, loops, recording, and practice tools on board. The Lava Me series became an international phenomenon, showing up in airport lounges, TikTok videos, and the hands of curious professionals marketed with the polish of a phone launch rather than a guitar release. Lava opened sleek retail stores, signed global ambassadors, and priced its instruments not as budget alternatives but as premium products, competing on innovation. That's the shift that matters. For 70 years, the guitar's future was designed in California and Nashville. The real threat to the old industry was never the cheap copies, it's the companies that stopped copying.